How are you doing, fellow coders, and welcome back to LARTech. In today's video, we will be continuing the Beginner's Python series with episode 4. We will be covering an essential part of Python, loops. We'll go over for loops as well as while loops. Let's get into the video. So, if you haven't already, go ahead and watch the previous videos in the series. I've provided a link in the description to the entire playlist so you can watch all of the videos and catch up. If you've caught up, then stick around. So before we start the video, we need to install something in Sublime Text. In this video, we'll be covering a bit of user input. What that means is that we'll be allowing the user to type things into our script. In order to do this, we need to install an extension to Sublime Text. Sublime Text does not currently support user input in its terminal, so we're going to need to install a third-party extension to be able to get input from the user. So how you do this is that you just go to Tools, and then Command Palette, and when you're in your command palette, type in install, and you will see package control install package. This is what we're going to click. And once you click that, you will get your package control. And inside of your package control, you should search up Terminus. Now, for me, it's not showing up because I've already installed Terminus, but for you, it should show up right here. Just click it and Terminus will install. So once you've installed Terminus, you can access it by going again to the command palette, which is just at Tools, Command Palette, and searching Terminus up. So once you search up Terminus in the command palette, you should see Terminus open default shell in tab. Click that and you get your terminal. Now inside of this terminal, we can access and run any Python script that we want. For example, if we want to run typesVariables.py, we could simply do Python types of variables.py. So here we're using the Python command and we're specifying the script that we want to run using Python. So if we hit enter, our script will run. Right now it didn't output anything because I commented out all the code, but if I go back to my script and I say something like print this is being shown through Terminus, for example, and you don't have to do any of this, I'm just making an example. So if I write this and I go back to my terminal and I say the same thing using the up key, then we get this is being shown through Terminus. So Terminus is working. Now that we have Terminus working, we can exit out of it, and I'll delete this code that I just wrote, and create our new script. Press Ctrl N to create our new script, and Ctrl S to save it. And we'll call it loops.py. Again, make sure to save it in your Beginner Python series folder, and if you haven't created your folder already, then you should just go ahead and create it. So hit save, and now we have our script. So before we start, let's go over what a loop is. A loop is an important part of computer science that allows programmers to run a bit of code multiple times. For example, if we want to print hello to the screen 100 times, instead of writing print hello over and over and over again, we can simply make a loop and say print hello 100 times. Without loops, computer science would be nothing. This is why it's very important to learn, and this is why I'm teaching you it in episode 4. So in Python, there are two types of loops. There's the for loop and there's the while loop. The for loop runs a given number of times. So as I said before, if we want to print hello to the screen 100 times, we could create a for loop and say for variable in range 0 to 100, print hello. This is a great place to use a for loop because we have a given set of times that we want to do something. In this case, we want to print hello 100 times. So we know how many times we want to do it, so we use a for loop. Let's go back to our code and write a for loop. A for loop is written pretty simply. You can simply say for variable and the variable name doesn't matter, so I'll just call it I for now. For I, and then we say in range 0 to 10. Notice how I'm using a comma, and I'm also using parentheses after range. Then we put a colon, and we hit enter, and we've created our for loop. So you may have noticed that Sublime Text automatically indented after we created our for loop. This is because we are essentially making a new block of code, and when you make a new block of code in Python, you have to indent. Since Python doesn't have curly brackets like other languages do, Python needs to use indents to show when a block of code starts and when it ends. Sublime Text has helpfully given us our indent automatically, which is another reason why it's a good text editor. So now, not focusing on indents, let's go over how this for loop is working. We're creating it using the for keyword. Then we're creating a variable called I, and we're saying for every I in the range of numbers between 0 and 10. What this will do now is it will run 10 times since it's going from 0 to 10. So if we said something like print our variable called I, then it will print every number from 0 to 10. So let's hit Control S and Control B to run. And as you can see here, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. This prints all the numbers from 0 to 10, but it does not include 10. This is because that's how for loops work. They go up to 10, but they don't include it. So if we wanted to include 10, then we can just increase 10 by 1 and make it 11. Now it will print every number between 0 and 11, including 10, but it will not print 11. So let's hit Control B to run. And as you can see here, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we get 10. So 10 is included, but 11 is not. Now the reason we start at 0 is because that's what we wanted to start at. We specified that our loop should go from 0 to 11. However, we actually didn't need to include 0 in our range. We can just delete our 0, and Python will automatically start our loop at 0. As you can see here, we get 0 again, even though we didn't specify. If we want to specify, let's say we wanted it to start at 3, then we can simply say 3, 11, and now it will print every number between 3 and 11, but not including 11. So if we hit Control B to run, we get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're starting at 3, and we're going to 11, but we're not including 11. I hope that makes sense. Now this is a good start, but it's not very practical. We're pretty much never going to use a for loop just to print out some numbers. So I'll comment this out. And let's start working on a practical use of the for loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a list called students. And don't worry about what a list is yet. We'll cover them pretty soon. Just know that a list stores multiple values. So we're going to create a list called students. And in that list, we're going to have some students. So we're just going to store the names of those students. Let's say Lartek and Bill and Jeff and Linda or something like that. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is that we have our list and it has some names in it. So let's go back to our code and create our list. And again, we're calling it students. And we're assigning it the value of the list. How you create a list in Python is that you use these square brackets. You don't use curly brackets, you use square brackets. So now that we have our square brackets, we can put the names of the students. So let's say Lartek, and then Bob, and then Jeff, and finally Linda. So we have our students, and we have 4 students in our list. Now let's say I want to print every student in my students list. This can be done with a for loop. We can say for student in students print student. Now this is extremely similar to the last for loop we made. In our last for loop, we created a range and we said to print every number between that range. But in this for loop, our range is students. So we're printing every student in our range of students. So if we hit Control B to run, we'll get every student. We'll get Lartek, Bob, Jeff, and Linda. So that works. Now let's say I wanted to separate every student in our list with a comma. Let's say I wanted to print our student and then print a comma after it. This can be done with the end variable. The end variable in Python just signals what we want our print statement to end with. So if we wanted it to end with a comma, then we can say comma end equals, and we can put a comma. So if we hit Control B to run, we will get the names of our students separated by a comma. And our end variable can be anything. It can be something like maybe a space. If we want to separate each name with a space, we can do that. Control B to run. And we get Lartek, space, Bob, space, Jeff, space, Linda, space. Again, you can put anything in this end variable. You can do something absolutely insane like this is a test of the end variable, or something mental like that you're absolutely never going to use. But let's just do it for now, because why not? So let's do it. Control B to run. We get Lartek, this is a test of the end variable. Bob, this is a test of the end variable. Jeff, this is a test of the end variable. Linda, this is a test of the end variable. And we finish. Now it should be pretty clear how powerful the end variable is. So use it wisely and make sure you're using it to make your print statements look neat. For now, I don't really want an end, so I'm just going to remove it. And now let's talk about while loops. So a while loop in Python is essentially the opposite of a for loop. As I said before, in a for loop, we are given the range of values that we want to do something with. In the two for loops that we made the first range, the range of numbers between 3 and 11, and we made the second range, the list of students. In a while loop, however, you don't have a fixed range. A while loop will keep doing something until you tell it to stop. Now this is very useful in games, for example. Let's say you wanted to run something while your player was alive. How would you do this? Well, you can use a while loop. You can firstly create a Boolean variable that stores whether or not the player has died. So we'll call that has player died. And then you can say, while the player has not died, do something. Now what you do doesn't really matter, but what matters is that you're making a while loop. So I'm going to go back to my code, and firstly I'm going to comment out my second for loop with Control \, and I'll implement our while loop. So I'll go down here, and firstly I'll make our Boolean variable. Remember from the last video, a Boolean variable is a variable that stores whether or not something is true or not. The Boolean variable can have the value of true or false. So let's make our Boolean variable, and let's call it player has died, and let's default it to false. The reason we're defaulting it to false is because the player isn't going to die immediately, right? The player is going to be alive until the player dies. So we'll set it to false, and we'll create our while loop. We create a while loop by using the while keyword. So while player has died equals false, and we'll just say do something. Notice how I'm using a comment here. The reason I'm using a comment is I'm just trying to explain that we're doing something and it doesn't really matter. This comment is completely ignored by Python, which is why it's pretty useful if you want to explain what you're doing in your code. So what we're saying here is we're making a while loop, and we're saying that while our player is not dead, then we do something. Notice here how I'm using a double equal sign. This is Python syntax to differentiate between when we're assigning a variable, like we are here, and when we're testing a condition, like we are here. Right here, we're testing whether or not player has died is equal to false, but right here, we're assigning the value of false to player has died. So don't get too confused with the double equal sign. It's going to come naturally to you when you start programming more. So here, instead of do something, let's actually write some logic. Let's say player underscore input, and now we're making player input, as I said before. Player input is equal to, and now we have the input function, which is a function in Python that just takes input from the user. So we have the input function, and inside of the input function, we can say what we want to be displayed to the screen while our player is putting in input. So here, let's say enter some input, and we'll put a colon for neatness. And now we have our player input variable. For now, we can just say print our player input. So now that we're dealing with user input, we can't use the default Sublime Text terminal anymore. We have to use our Terminus extension. So let's open up Terminus by going to Tools, Command Palette, and click Terminus, Open Default Shell in Tab. Now we have our terminal. We can say Python loops.py, and it runs. So here we have our input. It's saying enter some input, so I'll enter some input, maybe hello, this is LARTEC. And we get our input printed. We get hello, this is LARTEC printed to the user. So we can enter anything in our input. We can say, hi, how are you doing? And we get, hi, how are you doing? Or anything. We can just hit random keys and random numbers and a bunch of crazy stuff, and we get all of our crazy stuff. So our input is working. Now I'm going to close out of this terminal, and I'm going to go back to my code. Right now, our while loop is never ending. Our while loop will keep asking the user for input forever. It's never going to stop. This is obviously not ideal. This is going to take a lot of computing power, and I'm pretty sure none of you are immortal, so you won't be able to ever complete this script. This can be solved by adding some logic. So I'm going to add an if statement, and I'll say if player input equals, and notice how I'm using the double equal sign again, equals die, then let's set player has died to true. Now, if we set player has died to true, then this loop is going to exit. The reason it's going to exit is because the code inside of this loop only runs while this condition is met. If we set player has died to true, the condition of player has died equals false will not be met and the loop will terminate. So let's test this out using Terminus again. Tools, Command Palette, and Terminus, open default shell and tab. Now we'll say Python loops.py. Now if we enter some input like LARTEC, then it's still going to print out LARTEC and it'll ask me again to enter some input. Now if I say die, our loop will exit. As you can see, our script stopped running and we got sent back to the terminal. So it's working. So now that our while loop is working, we're pretty much done with it. However, we can also use the break keyword in our while loop. The break keyword will do essentially the same thing as this, except the break keyword will break the loop. So we're doing exactly what we're doing with this line, but we're just shortening it to one keyword. So let's say break. And now if we go back to our terminal and say Python loops.py, we will get enter some input, and if we say die, then we will break, and the same thing will happen. This is just a cleaner way of writing things. Now we have our break keyword, but we also have another keyword that we can use, and it is the continue keyword. The continue keyword will not exit out of the loop, but it will just go back to the beginning of the loop. If we use the continue keyword, then all of the code after the continue keyword will be completely ignored and we'll just shoot back to the beginning of the loop. So let's go back to our code and let's comment out our break and let's say continue. Now if we go back to our terminal and we say python loops.py, then after we say die in our input, then we will not break. We will simply go back to the beginning of the loop. The continue keyword can be extremely useful in a lot of cases. If you don't want anything to be done in your loop after a condition is met, then you can simply use the continue keyword, go back to the head of your loop, and run all of your code again. So I'll just comment this out, and I'll comment all my other code out too using Control \. And I think this is where I'll end the video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something about loops in Python. If you liked the video, like it, and if you didn't, dislike it and tell me what I did wrong so I can improve. If you want to see more tech and programming content like this, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a single video. I hope you're interested in tech because we'll be covering a lot of tech on this channel, but until the next video, this has been Lartech, signing out. Have a good day.